Chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello, hello, hello. Here is the geopolitical podcast, DieGutenMenschen, public enemies of the deep state. And your hosts are, as usual, the popes of the free and open society. Manuel Ochsenreiter, that is me, I'm editor-in-chief of German news magazine Zuerst. And on the other end, Mateusz Piskorski. Hello, Mateusz.
Hello, from Poland and from the weekly Myśl Polska, Polish Thought newspaper.
And today we are really the heads of the open society here in the internet, right?
Well, I guess so, because the open society, I guess, is trying to hide itself now in the times of coronavirus. We are also hiding in the bunker. Still, there's silence from representatives of open society as the pandemics develop all over the world.
Yes, so the open society is something like the afterburner also for that virus, I would say. I think we can say that, right?
And the open society seems to be closed now.
So we talk today about a topic which is, I think, very interesting for our listeners and for our audience. And that is George Soros. What are his plans? What does open society mean? These are terms we are using, and I was very shocked. Within the last 1-2 years, I saw that the term open society is used today by so many people in Europe who often obviously don't know the meaning of it. So it became, from an ideological term, strongly connected to Professor Karl Popper and of course to George Soros with his open society NGO network all over the world. Became a term used by a lot of people, even by people who are, when it comes to the content, strongly against the complex of open society.
Well, if you analyze Popper himself, it's quite simple and I would say even primitive interpretation of philosophy and of political philosophy. Still, I guess that his followers, those who claim the followers of Karl Popper, make it even more primitive in these times, yes, than the original concept of open society. Just to remind it, I mean, the essence of Popper is and of his followers was that actually there is a huge tradition of European political and philosophical thought that represents the so-called idea of closed society or the enemies of the open society. And this huge current of European thought starts with Plato and ends with Hitler and Stalin. So this is, of course, a vulgar interpretation of what Popper wrote. But anyway, you can come to such a conclusion that it's very, I would say, not only simplistic, but even primitive understanding of European intellectual traditions.
Exactly, and if we draw the line from Plato to Hitler and Stalin, so we have to draw this line furthermore today to Viktor Orban, for example, or to Marine Le Pen, or to Salvini, or to the state of Cuba, Venezuela.
Putin as well,
of course.
Xi Jinping, of course,
yes,
and a lot of others. Yes, that's right.
What is
even Trump to some extent.
Yes. Of course, Trump is not the perfect representative of the open society. It were more guys like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. That is true.
Yes, exactly.
But when it comes, I have a question. When it comes to George Soros and his work, did you notice that he is presented in mainstream media and mainstream politics not so much as a philosophical or political thinking person, but more like a philanthrope, like a helper, like the one who helps the oppressed, the minorities, those who don't have a voice. Did you notice that? So he is like a messiah. He's presented in our media.
Well, it's part of his PR campaign. It's very long-term project. I mean, when it comes to building his image, it's quite a paradox that on the one hand we are talking about a man who has destabilized the economies and ordinary lives, social lives, economic well-being of millions of people in different countries because of what he is doing as his job for earning billions of dollars. And on the other hand, he tries to present himself as someone who is a philanthropist. I think that of course it's if we use let's say monocausal explanations, he would be a guy who is using all this ideology for his own sake. Yes, this is the part of the explanation, I guess. But what do you think? We can also think about some other aspects of his activity, not only of covering his economic financial activities, which he is doing everywhere.
Well, the black box about the acting of George Soros and his NGOs was always by his defenders presented to say he's just doing good stuff and he is supportive for the minorities and for liberal student groups and for LGBT and for migrants and so on, but he has no personal benefit by this. So the black box is, where is the personal benefit? And at that point I would like to recommend an article which was published in 2007 in the British newspaper The Statesman by a British journalist, by a brilliant British journalist, one has to say, Neil Clark, originally a left-wing journalist who did a very deep research about Soros activities in the Balkans in the 90s. And in that context, I would like to quote Professor Alexander Dugin, who once said, "The open society comes always along with the open market. There is no open society without an open market, and the open market goes along with the open society. These are the two sides of the same coin." And what Neil Clark did in a very precise and deep research, he showed and he presented how George Soros, as investor, had a lot of personal benefit, personal financial benefit, by opening the markets of the Balkan countries, especially of Serbia, but also with Kosovo, how his investment companies took advantage of the open society and open market activities of such Soros NGOs. Of course, maybe the individual student supportive for an open society NGO might not know about these things, and he might really go on the streets because he believes in some globalist liberal aims he is marching for. But at the end, it was indeed a private financial benefit for George Soros himself. So that opened for a short moment the black box. I will put this article in the description of this podcast so that the readers can check for themselves. It is a very interesting case study, and it is a pity that there are not more journalists really going deeper when it comes to George Soros, because I am convinced that if we look to the last decades of color revolutions, which were strongly fueled by Soros and his open society NGOs, that we will see there also companies taking advantage of the new free market rules. We know when free market is introduced, it comes along with a lot of chaos, it comes along with an inconsistency in law, and that there are individuals and companies, economic entities, quickly taking advantage of such a situation. What do you think?
Well, I agree totally, but there's one other aspect. I mean, there are several publications about George Soros, also some books published in different countries. But the problem is that sometimes I guess that those publications criticizing George Soros and his activities were ordered by himself. Why? Because some of them focus on, well, let's say, not the most important aspects of his activity. I mean, there are several books, for instance, written by, all those conspiracy theorists perceived as madmen. Then there are lots of books about George Soros and focusing on his, let's say, ethnical or national background, on his participation in a kind of global plot, and so on. So they do not focus on the most important aspects, to say the least, of Soros' activities. That's why every journalist investigation about his economic activities and the interrelations between his political, social activism and economic financial benefits is really something very important and worth to be promoted now, yes, to understand the essence of the activities of this guy. On the other hand, there's also another topic which will be very interesting to study. This is the topic of, let's say, relations between Soros and his empire, his NGOs, his foundations, and different American administrations and authorities. For instance, his relations with the democratic establishment of the deep state. Yes, that is also worthy to study, and because, well, I guess, and I would rather claim that Soros is somehow a part of the policy of American deep state in different regions, yes, which means that he's only one of the instruments or one of the participants of, perhaps not instruments, but participants of some plans of neoliberal deep state from the US. What do you think about it?
Absolutely, yes, and we shouldn't forget in that context that these circles, these neoconservative and neoliberal circles in Washington, I mean, when they speak about US-American foreign politics, that they use the term world inner politics, and that goes totally also along with the ideas of open society, which sees humanity not anymore as a collective of nations of different cultures and religions, but, well, maybe as the most extreme form of individualism. So what makes the individual, well, like a thing you can simply put from one place to the other place. You can trade with, you can sell it, you can buy it. The individuals themselves, they have the interest of being consumers, but no much more any other identities. So this view on the world, of the one world, which is promoted very strongly by Soros and his NGOs, is of course also promoted by those circles in Washington in a very, very hardcore way, and it coincides that it comes together. And I think that Soros and his NGOs are if we imagine Washington as the tanker ship, the ship with a lot of masses, with all the soldiers and with all the ideas, the Soros NGOs are maybe acting more like submarines and like little battleships on this field. They can react very quick on crisis. They can very quickly enable liberal student groups for protests. So they can act much faster and much more efficient than, for example, an official US-American institution could do so. You agree?
Yes, but they are part of the huge fleet.
Exactly. That is what I mean.
And part of this fleet and part of the expansionist plans of the so-called deep state, I guess. So anyway, I think that, yes, it's really worthy to promote in-depth and professional articles and investigations of several authors on Soros and his activities. On the other hand, I think we should notice that the US itself as such, due to the crisis you have now, tends to have some problems or potential problems. Well, let's not be too optimistic, of course, but there are some states which are claiming now that they should get more sovereignty and even independence in the future. Have you heard about such states?
Yes, of course. I think there is a movement in Hawaii, there is a movement in Texas, and there is also a movement in California, right?
Yeah, I guess they wouldn't care about Hawaii, only from the point of view of military, let's say, strategic things, but, well, California, if it would be a separate state, it should be the 5th largest economy of the world, which means that California is something more than a self-sufficient entity. It would be one of the economic empires and technological empires.
And would be Arnold Schwarzenegger then its president? That's an important question.
Yes,
that's an important question.
That could be quite possible because, as we know, the theoretical independent state of California would have completely different electoral law, and you should probably permit Schwarzenegger, born in Austria, to become its president.
Absolutely.
So that would be one of the advantages of independent California compared to the US, I guess. Yes.
But I'm very worried about the demographics in independent California, since what I learned that this is the paradise of LGBT activists.
Ah, that's quite interesting. I'm sure that they are completely different from the rest of US, also when it comes to the cultural issues.
Yes,
without any doubt. On the other hand, you have the demographic issue, at least partly solved by a huge flow of migration from Latin American countries, mainly Mexico, of course. Anyway. It's quite interesting, and we are serious talking about it because just a few weeks ago and again a few days ago, we had some news from California, from the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who claimed and first used the term for California, the term nation state. Mm-hmm. Quite interesting. What do you think?
Yes, and if we would have had the same debate 10 years ago, or let us say even 6-7 years ago, I'm totally convinced that we both, you and me, would have said, "Oh, come on, this is no science fiction or this is fairy tale telling." But since what we saw, especially in the last years, wouldn't you have said it's science fiction that Crimea changes from Ukraine to Russia? If someone would have told us 10 years ago that this is possible, or that there will be 2 self-declared independent states in the east of Ukraine. So things which are considered today as some mind fairy tale or some weirdo ideas can be real. Can be real already tomorrow, or at least in some weeks and months. Yes.
Yes, exactly. That's why I think that we should talk about the details of potential separatist tendencies in the US with California, with the alliance. Actually, California has just announced that they have created an alliance of West Coast states, which means that there are already three, yes, Oregon and Washington.
And
So I guess it could be quite interesting for our listeners as well to go deeper into this topic. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that we point now with the finger right on a weakness again of European mainstream journalism and European mainstream politics, where the United States of America are always presented and seen as a kind of one central state led by President Trump, now especially with Trump, but that they totally ignore the federalist structure of the United States of America, what we have even in the name of this country, that it calls itself United States, and that the several states, not just California, have a very, very strong own identity. And that these things can become there very quickly a chain reaction. And I think it would be a very interesting topic for one of our next podcasts, since in my opinion, especially the US-American separatism, or the separatism within the United States of America, is totally ignored for now, also by European observers. And I think it could be very interesting. I mean, we look to Catalonia, we look to northern Italy, we look to Silesia in Poland, in today's Poland, but the possibility of a crackdown, of a disintegration of the United States of America, which is today due to the corona crisis, also, well, let's say it becomes a little bit more likely than it was a half a year ago, could be quite interesting. And I think it would be a good thing to discuss these things.
Yes, exactly. And definitely, as we have already noticed in our podcast, the traditional state structures, or the existing state structures, go bankrupt. And, well, in different places of this world, different new entities might be established. We were talking last time about the big cities and let's say the local initiatives which could take part of the duties of the state in different parts of the world. But on the other hand, I'm sure that there will be a lot of at least regionalist tendencies in different parts of the world, with the United States as well on this list. So let's discuss it soon.
If California does a referendum, what are we going to do? We will support Californian independence, of course we will. Right?
I would suggest to be there as an independent observer.
Of course, we should we should do that. And since I am almost half Austrian, it's clear how I would decide in this terms. Of course, I'm with Arnold Schwarzenegger, with our leader of California.
Yes, and that would be another Austria, yes?
Absolutely.
Somewhere on the second side of the ocean.
Yes, it will be called Sunshine Austria.
Yes.
Okay, for now, I'm looking forward when we discuss separatism and regionalism, and I am very, very convinced that we will speak also again about California and about Arnold Schwarzenegger in this context.
Yes, about Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's never enough.
Yes, I totally agree. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much to our listeners. It was a pleasure again. And
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, and hear you soon. Bye.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.